Welcome to today's roundtable webinar brought to you by Delphix, Couchbase, and DataVeil. I'm Stephen Fegg, Director of Database Trends and Applications and Unisphere Research. I will be your host for today's broadcast. Our presentation today is titled Database Management in the Cloud, Adapting to the Changing Landscape. Before we begin, I want to explain how you can be a part of this broadcast. There will be a question and answer session. If you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box provided and click on the submit button. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible, but if your question is not selected during the show, you will receive an email response. Plus, all viewers today will be entered for a chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card just for participating. Now, to introduce our speakers for today, we have Clint Sprov, Director of Product Marketing at Delphix, Tim Rotak, Director of Product Marketing at Couchbase, and Michael Argowal, Global Practice Leader, Cloud Databases, SRE, and NoSQL at DataVeil. Now I'm going to pass the event over to Clint to get us started. Welcome to the broadcast, Clint.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Well, thank you, everyone. It's definitely a pleasure to be here. My topic for today, although we're talking about adapting to the changing landscape, I want to focus on the multi-cloud and multi-cloud data automation and governance for CI and CD at scale. So when you think about just DevOps in general, especially for the cloud, DevOps is really synonymous with automation, whether that's automating different parts of the application lifecycle, whether it's test automation. Automation is really at the forefront. And typically, organizations, they struggle with automating certain pieces of the software development lifecycle. And here we see where DevOps is data is really the last DevOps automation frontier. So when we say that over the last decade, almost all parts of the enterprise application stacks they've tried to automate it. And of course, today you can use APIs to provision software, servers, storage, networks, and so forth in private and public clouds. But data is constantly growing in production applications. There are changes within every release, and it's often filled with risk. So this is why we say that data is the last DevOps automation frontier. And to make this even more complex, if we think about the number of applications that we have to integrate, that makes it even more of a challenge. So what also makes data so hard to automate? Well, we know the multi-cloud increases data complexity and risk. So apps are on the move in today's technology landscape. Enterprises used to run on mainframes. A lot of them still do, of course, and Unix systems in private data centers. But many have increasingly moved to open systems and applications across SaaS, PaaS, IaaS, public, and private clouds. Now, managing data across the global multi-cloud is very complex and costly, and it's also very risky, with every cloud offering a proprietary point solution with different functionality and APIs. And data cannot be constantly managed in heterogeneous silos. So as you can see here, if we look at not only from on-prem to cloud, we have all these different types of applications, whether they are packaged applications such as Salesforce, maybe a ServiceNow, or even some of these various cloud platforms, AWS, GCP, and Azure. And what makes it even more complex is the integration of these packaged applications and systems within the cloud. So you can imagine, and I'm sure within your organization, you have at least several cloud-based applications that are integrated within the solution, whether it's a ServiceNow connecting to back-end processes from SAP and then Workday and so forth. So all these different systems really increase the actual risk of the application. So when we look at this, a multi-cloud data operational model is really required to navigate this complex environment successfully. So if your organization is looking to ensure that you can reduce the risk in these multi-cloud environments, you want to introduce a data mesh or something that unifies data compliance, governance, and automation across applications and cloud platforms. So data governance is achieved through operational control and visibility of test data across multi-cloud applications, databases, environments, and releases. Data automation at CI/CD speed and enterprise scale is more straightforward and more powerful by combining something like what we have at Delphix, which is we call the data control tower, with continuous data. So you want continuous data and continuous compliance. So what organizations need is really a unified API gateway, a self-service automation tool that's plug and play. So DevOps integration so we can streamline the initial configurations and day-to-day workflows. And finally, what organizations need is a continuous compliance solution that provides robust data compliance in environments while reducing cost and enabling faster quality software development. Because at the end of the day, it's about making sure you're releasing quality applications, but you want to make sure that your data also supports that across the board, whether it's dev and in test as well as production, so you can reduce the risk. Then when we look at some of the challenges in managing application lifecycle data at scale, and that's what it really is about, really at scale. And if we look at it across these key areas from multi-cloud all the way to CI/CD. So enterprises manage hundreds to thousands of applications across public and private clouds, as well as SaaS applications. These applications all have data that needs to be managed through the application lifecycle. Now, managing data, as we talked about before, across the multi-cloud is complex, costly, and risky. And data cannot be consistently managed in heterogeneous silos. So applications grow in data volume every year, and many applications contain sensitive and personal identification information, PII, of course, and data privacy and industry regulations continue to evolve with increased penalties and fines. Now, you probably have seen some of the latest data breaches with some of one of the large telco providers, and also within some of these other organizations. So these data risks are very real. And so a lot of times this not only includes penalties and fines, but also can include jail time. In addition, cyber criminals and hostile nation states continue to target and attempt to breach enterprise data stores. Also, application development and analytics. If we look at this particular area, it requires complex tool chains across SaaS, private and public clouds. As data moves across applications, it needs to integrate with a large range of tools and other applications that can vary by cloud, including source code repositories, data governance tools, build tools, automation platforms, and of course, release management tools. And then we look at it from a developer's perspective and data scientists. Developers and data scientists need the right data at the right time to do their work. So in order for them to test a new release, developers need access to environments with realistic application data while trying to maintain compliance with data privacy and industry regulations. Data scientists also need access to realistic compliant data for analytics, and as well as AI and machine learning, as well as model training. And companies will employ DevOps and build automated CI/CD pipelines to achieve world-class innovation rates. So as we know with DevOps, speed is the name of the game. Most of the application stacks have been automated and can be driven by APIs, including compute, storage, network, and code. But application data remains difficult to automate at speed and scale. So the only way an organization can fully govern its data and protect it from vulnerabilities, while at the same time accelerating key initiatives like CI/CD and data science, is by implementing a data mesh. This is the type of data architecture that facilitates multi-cloud data governance. That has central visibility and control of data risk, complex toolchain integrations, governs data self-service, and central data automation at scale. And again, the goal is to make sure that you can do this and maintain not only referential integrity, but making sure that you can do this at scale with large amounts of data that's stored in various locations. And to give you an example, Delphix employs a data mesh architecture that enables data to be governed in zones to meet residency and sovereignty requirements. Each data engine can sync data locally, store data, history, and versions, and automate data delivery into lifecycle environments, unified under a single control plane that spans SaaS, public and private clouds. So when we talk about this data mesh architecture, what exactly is part of this architecture itself? So this includes distributed data nodes, managing data in zones for sovereignty and residency, as we talked about, replicate production or mask streams as needed, and centralized controlled APIs. And so this allows enterprises to keep data in a place where it exists rather than bringing it all together. Each data engine or node can sync data locally, store data history and versions, and automate data delivery into lifecycle environments while unified under a single control plane with a data library. This also allows integrating the tool chains and APIs, so therefore you can sync data and have referential integrity across disparate sources. Through the management APIs and user interfaces, administrators have a cockpit to proactively manage their data infrastructure and incorporate data governance practice. So this makes a huge difference for those organizations that are really trying to manage their data, and they have these different data silos that they need to make sure that they maintain referential integrity across these multiple applications and multiple systems. So when we talk about this, we're talking about central compliance and management of sensitive data. So the three key pillars of that is really discover, mask, and provision. So when we talk about discover, we want to have global discovery, visibility, and governance, which is key to making sure that you can adapt to the changing application landscape in the cloud. And then, of course, masking for compliance and compliance orchestration at scale. How can we manage all these disparate data sources and making sure that we can handle this as our data, which will continue to grow? And if it's in a multi-cloud environment on different systems, we need to make sure that this information is masked properly. And then provision. How do we provision our data? So we want to make sure the automation of secure data supply chain is available for these organizations. So with that, let me give you just a little bit of information about Delphix and our solution and how we actually maintain this. So our DevOps data platform helps solve the modern challenges of test data management. We automate data delivery with test data APIs, so you can release quality software as fast as you want. Our software engines also run across the multi-cloud and work for SaaS and PaaS, as well as private clouds. And so we also make sure that we combine immutable data, automated data, discovery, masking, and delivery, which enables a zero trust operating model. So another key benefit is green data. So we want to make sure that we can help better utilize and reduce cost and reduce the environmental impact. So this is the data platform. If you'd like to know more about data mesh and our data mesh architecture, check out delphix.com. And I thank you for the presentation, listening to our presentation today. So I will pass it on back to Steve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clint. Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker for today, Tim Rotak, Director of Product Marketing at Couchbase.
Great. Thank you so much. So today what I wanted to talk to you about is a little bit about Couchbase, a little bit about what we're hearing from our customers about what they're doing in terms of developing modern applications in the cloud, and then tell some customer stories to give you a bit more context of what that means to them and how they're modernizing. So as we talk to our customers about what they're trying to do and how they're trying to modernize their businesses, stay ahead competitively, right? We hear a couple of themes from them. It's that applications have changed dramatically over the past 15 to 20 years. If you think about, older applications that were built, for retail or finance, they were very static. It was, they're historically internal only. But the world has really changed, and the way we experience, applications and apps on our phones, is very different than it used to be, right? And so these customers and companies they want to first and foremost build great experiences, right? There's a high degree of touch, a high degree of personalization. Things need to move very quickly and just work everywhere, right? It can't go down. They also have challenges of internally developing these applications in a way where, teams move around a lot, and you want to tap those skills that you have. You're trying to accelerate and develop applications quickly. And, as was mentioned in the last talk, right, avoiding data sprawl, right? Those data silos can be a very big challenge. And then you got to roll it out. You have to deploy everywhere, supporting the hybrid clouds. Data needs to go out to the edge, right? Everyone's got a smartphone nowadays, right? And things need to be up 100% of the time, right? So all of those demands of building new modern applications has a knock-on effect of databases. Databases have changed radically. Again, from the first relational database, and when that came out back in, what was it, like the 60s. Some of those legacy requirements are still very important. Having structure in your data, supporting ACID transactions, having consistency, things like that. But these applications need to scale out to millions of users. They need to be flexible to support like agile development and microservices and things like that. And there's a huge amount of data, or it can be, right? So that has changed in building applications. And so if we look at it from the standpoint of, okay, building an application, what are my data management needs? My application will have functional requirements, and there's database and infrastructure associated with that, right? But that's a very simplistic view, of course. And going back to the idea of data silos and data sprawls, this is a bit more realistic of what we see in organizations, whether they're got their applications, their microservices, their edge apps, right? Their customers are typically using a wide variety of databases or data management related products, right? And you can see, a big number of choices out there for them to do that. And there has been this idea that, get the database that's specifically suited to the exact kind of functional requirements you need just for that one microservice. The challenge is, though, as an organization, having all of these different tools leads to data sprawl, managing all of these different platforms, managing all of the different data between them, right? Some of that was talked about in the last talk. But the additional effects, licensing and training and support and integration, all of these things have costs both operationally and financially, right? And as well introduce new risks. So that kind of brings us to the Couchbase data platform. And Capella is our database as a service in the clouds. And what Couchbase offers as a data platform is those core services and functionality within one platform. Couchbase began over 10 years ago with the joining of two companies. One was an integrated caching product, in-memory caching product, and a JSON document data store. So the merger of those two components are at the heart of the Couchbase platform. That data can be accessed, that JSON data is accessed with key value. It can be structured with scopes and collections, which kind of gives it a way that we can easily migrate relational data into Couchbase. But importantly so, we have SQL as our main query language. So for those who are coming from a relational world, want to move into a modern database, they can use SQL that they know to write queries and access the data in the Couchbase database and those JSON documents, right? And pass that on to the applications and so forth. There's services for full text search, operational analytics, and a client-side eventing, all built into the kind of the core platform. And then that data in the cloud, stored in a cluster, can be replicated to other regions, managing data sovereignty and the local restrictions and regulations and so forth, but also synced out to an embedded mobile database that we have that customers are putting into their mobile applications, all within the Couchbase environment. And so when you combine all of these things, really how Couchbase stands out, we talk about being a fast database with our in-memory architecture, flexibility in terms of JSON and the different services that we provide, the familiarity for those who come from relational, in terms of use of SQL and ACID transactions and things like that. And the affordability of scaling in the cloud and having different controls to control these services in a very cost-effective way. So that's kind of Couchbase in a nutshell. And I'll get into some customer stories in a second. But why are the customers coming to Couchbase? It often what we're hearing from them is a move from another database. It's not enough performance at scale, typically. The flexibility that they're seeking, getting away from relational, wanting a strong mobile solution, and driving down costs, right? And there's a variety of different use cases that are very common, but these are often aligned to these modern applications of building a personalized experience, a dynamic experience, so people can scale those applications quickly and globally. So in terms of the Couchbase products, I mentioned Capella, which is our database as a service in the cloud. Customers can also choose to self-manage in the cloud with our server product, whether they just do that themselves or automate with kind of our Kubernetes option. And both of those cloud-based databases will sync out the data to our mobile embedded database. So let's talk a few customer stories, a few customer examples. So Couchbase is used by over 30% of the Fortune 100. You may never have heard of us, but we are trusted by some very large players. You may have heard of FICO, your FICO credit score. FICO uses Couchbase on the back end for their Falcon fraud detection platform. So FICO works with over 10,000 retailers and banks and financial institutions, and they're doing fraud detection over 65% of the world's credit card transactions, right? So a huge number. And all of that needs to be processed in a couple seconds, right? Because you can't have somebody just standing there for 2 minutes, right? So FICO was using Oracle. They weren't able to scale, weren't able to get the uptime, and weren't able to get the speed that they needed. Carnival Cruise Line uses Couchbase for its Carnival Medallion program. So if you take a Carnival cruise, you get a little medallion that you carry around with you on the ship. And they needed a very flexible solution that had database triggering and work offline because they're out in the ocean. And if you're in your room, let's say on a cruise, and you order a sandwich, you go down to the pool, the application knows this because of the database triggers, and your sandwich is delivered down to your sandwich. So it's at the heart of the Carnival experience. LinkedIn uses Couchbase as caching and for user profiles. So everyone, when you're logging into LinkedIn and you're in that session state and making changes, that is being powered by Couchbase. And Staples is a good example of like a dynamic product catalog. So Staples uses Couchbase for peer-to-peer shoppers, right? So they've got 4,000 stores around the globe as a sorry, not peer-to-peer, their B2B shopping experience. As someone logs into staples.com, depending who they are, where they are, what they've bought in the past, things that are on sale, things that are within the store, the catalog is produced dynamically to that individual person, and they're applying a huge number of rules in memory to make that experience great and very flexible. Couchbase is used across a wide variety of industries. So just kind of a quick smattering here, but it's quite a horizontal solution. And I wanted to tell you kind of two other quick customer stories. So Nexon, a gaming company out of Asia, using our Couchbase Capella product, a very large player in the gaming industry, over 80 mobile games. And as they were looking to roll out their Blue Archive game, this was about a year ago, they wanted the flexibility that they could launch in different markets very quickly. So they wanted to move away from relational. They wanted a JSON database, but they wanted it to be scalable and fast. And so they were able to use our geo-replication capabilities, and they could launch in a new market in about 20 minutes, right? So they were able to spin up a database, move the critical data that they needed, and they were off and running, right? So they were and in terms of database as a service, they a lot easier for them to manage, tons of automation and scalability things all set up for them in the background. Another quick example here is a global financial provider. So very large player in the industry, doing currency transactions for over 150 million customers around the globe. They've been a Couchbase customer since 2016, and using us for you can see here a large list of key use cases on their side, and they recently moved to our Capella database as a service in the cloud as well. They wanted to get that automation, get to a situation where things are more streamlined, just easier to manage and reduce total cost of ownership. So they moved over 8 of their critical applications. That happened very quickly, and they're in the process of moving 2 more, and now Capella is their data platform of choice. So kind of just summing up here, going back to the larger theme in terms of data management in the cloud and building modern applications, right? To support that scalability, to support that flexibility, and to support dynamic personalization, you need a platform that can offer a wide variety of services and has that automation built in to scale out and support those needs. I just have kind of a quick call out slide with links, so you'll be able to get these afterwards. A link to some white papers, videos, and places like our playground where you can log in and try Couchbase for free and run code and do samples and things like that. So thank you so much. That's all I have for my time right now. So I'll pass it back.
Thank you very much, Tim. It's my pleasure to introduce our final speaker for today, Michael Argowal, Global Practice Director, Cloud Databases, SRE, and NoSQL at Datavale. Welcome to the broadcast, Michael.
Thank you, Stephen. Glad to be here. Clint and Tim kind of covered how cloud is changing the landscape. Both Delphix and Couchbase are very good products. Actually, we do support some customers, provide managed support for Couchbase. So I'm a big fan of Couchbase. So I'm here to talk about how it is changing database administrators and the role. So first and foremost, I have a lot of respect for all the database administrators out there. It's not an easy job. A lot of times you get called on for performance tuning, outage, things like that. And definitely appreciate all the work you guys do. So with that, I'm going to go very brief overview of who I am, who Datavale is, and then very quickly jump into the main part of the presentation. I have 25 years in experience. I have been software developer, DBA. I have been technical program manager, cloud architect, and last 6-7 years I have been more into leadership roles. At Datavale, I lead the cloud database, NoSQL, and site reliability engineering practice. I won't go over too much over this, but Datavale has a partnership with AWS, a lot of credentials there, same with Microsoft Azure and Oracle. We support commercial databases like SQL Server, Oracle, but we have also built a lot of practice around open source databases and the different variations of those open source databases on both AWS and Azure. Also, with the cloud database, there are a lot of initiatives going on within the organizations, from cloud migrations to analytics modernization, moving apps on-prem to cloud migrations with some optimizations and modernizations in between, and Datavale kind of help with all those types of projects. So let's get to the main reason why I'm here to talk about how cloud is changing the role of a database administrator. And this kind of give a really good overview of what that difference is and how the DBAs have to kind of transform their skills and their knowledge in some areas, and some things are still same. And we're going to talk about that and how the cloud platform is kind of helping actually DBAs to be more effective. So if you're on-prem, you definitely have, on-prem, or you renting out a space in a data center, either the third party or you are responsible for power, maybe dual power, dual network in some cases, heating, cooling, of course, safely decommissioning hard drives, server maintenance, recycle of these servers, patching, installing OS. If you have VMware, Hyper-V, something like that, you managing virtualization, patching, and of course, when it comes to higher level database side of things, you're installing, upgrading. That might include minor patch, minor version upgrade. It may include major version upgrades, backups, of course, and the chain of the backups, including so you can restore to point of time for some high critical systems. High availability. So every technology has its own thing. Oracle SQL Server, they have their own ways to provide you either a standby node or maybe a read node secondary. Scaling also kind of you're responsible for it. Disaster recovery, if your data center goes down, or fire or earthquake, things like that, how you recover your data. And then, of course, as you start to interact with application development teams, you're responsible for schema, design, all the database core, stored procedures, functions, performance tuning, all those aspects you're responsible for. As you start to adopt AWS, Azure, OCI, Google Cloud, almost all of them have very similar differentiation in terms of infrastructure as a service. So they start to take over pretty much data center and virtualization layer. So they start to provide, dual power and maybe triple power. We don't know, but they give you SLAs. Same for network. And the idea is they are the leader in this area, so they know what they're doing. So they build a lot of reliability layer to give you higher SLA and uptime. Also, hardware recycle, server maintenance, the drives, and following the DoD decommissioning process for drives, things like that, all taken care by the service, the cloud provider. It makes your security audit also easy, simply because they start to take, who is going in and out of data center, the logs for the data center, the decommissioning of hard drive, all that is done by service provider. So you are responsible for some portions of security audit, of course, all the configurations you do. So you will see a lot from AWS, Azure, this shared responsibility model where you are responsible when you configure services, and then the virtualization layer and below is the cloud provider responsible. If you have Azure VM and AWS EC2, so I will focus more on AWS and Azure. That's I know most. I know some OCI, GCP, but let's focus for the sake of discussion Azure, AWS. If you're doing EC2 or VM on Azure, you doing a OS patching, you still install from binaries. So you might have binaries in a S3 bucket or Azure Blob Storage, or somewhere you load it and install it, or you basically create a AMI, the machine, the image for the OS, which has the database already on it, and then you doing all the, once database up and running, you're doing the minor major version upgrades, you're doing backups, responsible for, and all other activities. Now, as you go to the platform as a service, so I will give you some examples like AWS RDS, AWS Aurora, for example. On the Azure side, you have Azure managed instance for SQL Server, managed instance for MySQL, and also NoSQL databases like AWS DocumentDB or Azure Cosmos DB, for example, or AWS Neptune, or AWS Keyspaces, which are compatible with Cassandra, for example. So on those managed services, so AWS always call it managed services. They don't go by platform as a service. But Azure and many other cloud providers, they differentiate between infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. So they start to take a bigger role. In addition to virtualization and below, a lot of times you don't have access to the OS. So if you need to install something, some kind of batch job or some integration, this may not work for you. But if it's just a database service, then you might be okay. So the OS behind the scene patching is kind of taken care by the cloud provider. Of course, it's all automated. Not a person installing it. It's the orchestration layer that cloud provider build and manage to do OS patching. Same for database install and upgrades. You just say which version you need, and behind the scene there is an orchestration built by the cloud providers, which make that available, make install and configure it. And then you do have a choice how you want to configure it. So with Oracle, SQL Server, MySQL, all these installs, there are a lot of configuration parameters. You get to specify that as a script, and then of course the cloud provider behind the scene look at that configuration you provided and install it for you. Also, the minor version upgrade, you just say checkbox, go ahead and do it. You define a maintenance window, and it does automatically. Sunday 2 in the morning, maintenance window kicks in, and your database get minor version upgrades. A lot of times, of course, major version upgrades, you don't want to auto schedule it. You not do testing and things like that, and have a more control. But also, when you are ready to do it, it's just a you're not necessarily going to install binaries, anything like that. It's all done by cloud provider. Database backups are often built in the sense you sometimes don't have access to the backup. You can only restore. So some limitations there too. So nobody can tamper with your backups, and they are safe, and it's in some cases done by default. You don't even have to enable it. I put HA, scaling, and DR in a different color simply because these things are not done by default. So HA, for example, on RDS or Azure managed instances, you just enable multi-AZ, and then you have a standby node in a second upload zone, which is a separate data center within the same region. So you enable it, and where you need it, you don't need HA everywhere. Production systems, in most cases. Scaling, some of the things are becoming more auto scaling, like the storage. You can do auto scaling, but let's say you're changing the VM sizing and stuff. It's a lot easier to do. You just schedule it or actually do it in the maintenance window, and you have a new instance with either less or more specs. And same for DR. You can enable it, but as a DBA and a database architect, you're always responsible for schema, all the code which goes on into it, and the tuning, indexing, tuning, those aspects of it. So the rest of the slides kind of go a little bit more detail what we just talked about. If you're doing installation, on-prem, you're going to do media file or command lines and things like that. Infrastructure as a code, not much difference, in terms of if you're doing through the code, but definitely a lot more tools out there. You got CloudFormation on AWS, and Azure as ARM template, and then you can use your Python bash scripts to kind of fully automate. In our case, when we provide services from Datawhale, we automate all that. Database backup and recovery is different in the cloud, in the sense you just enable it if you are using managed service, platform as a service. But if you're using a EC2 on AWS or Azure VM, you have to do your own backup and recovery, and it's very similar to on-prem. HA and DR, same thing for EC2 VM. It doesn't change anything. For managed service, platform as a service, you just enable it, or in some cases it's by default. Especially with DR, sometimes they make multiple copies of the same data within the same region. So they have to have a region-wide. Region is multiple upload zone, and each upload zone is multiple data centers. So they have a region-wide outage for DR to be effective. Performance and tuning, that's when I was a DBA, that was my showtime. That's where I shine, where I'll get into and solve complex problems, indexing problems. That's not going to change, and that's where I think, if you ask me, that's the expertise that DBA provide that hard to find anywhere else. It's kind of hard for other groups like application developers or system administrators to kind of look at the code and optimize it. Security compliance on the cloud, you have less surface area to protect simply because you are, as you know, since you're not managing virtualization, you only enable the outbound and inbound, only the port which is allowed. So it's very tightly controlled, and you have to enable it through security group, for example. So that to me is less surface area to protect compared to on-prem. It has sometimes a lot more inbound, outbound going. I remember on-prem, I had to actually do a lot of benchmarking before I can buy something, and because a 3-month period to buy and install on a cloud, I can do a lot faster. And not only that, I don't have to be perfect. I can change the specs later on, so it's not an end of the world if I don't have the right specs right at the front. ETL, no change. Being agile is important. That's where you have to know everything up front. Compared to in the cloud, you're able to change. If you don't need a multi-AZ initially, that's fine. If you need, as your customers get higher or your systems get critical, you can enable HA later on. So those kind of agility factors are there. It also, the global replication a lot easier in the cloud. Some databases have a global table concept. Scaling is easier. I don't have to go to storage engineer, ask for more storage or better performance. I just run my script on the cloud and I get a new storage. Same for all the scaling. The design development, that's where the database architect role is very important. That's not going to change. Having a right design, primary key, foreign key, constraint, all that's very important. Deployment not changing. If you have a release every 2 weeks, it may be different type of deployment, but things are very similar, whether it's on-prem or cloud. The data center reliability is more in the cloud. We talked about that earlier on. I remember earlier in the days where the VMware wasn't properly configured and there was some performance problem. I don't have to worry in the cloud because companies like Amazon and Microsoft and Google doing that. So I kind of have more confidence that they do the right way. And we covered the major and minor upgrades earlier on in terms of how that impacts, doing on-prem versus cloud. So with that, I will give back to Stefan, and I appreciate your time for this presentation.
Thank you very much, Michael. At this point, we're going to dive into questions from our viewers. Clint, our first question is for you. Can you explain a bit more about the data mesh architecture?
Yes, sure. So data mesh can kind of be somewhat confusing, but just to kind of break it down and make it simple, it's really about, when you think about data mesh, it's really about decentralizing data and ownership. And so it's also about, so just kind of give you the formal definition. So data mesh, basically what it does, it emphasizes decentralized data ownership and management using domain-oriented self-contained data products. So with a data mesh architecture, think of it this way: your data is treated as a product created, owned, and managed by individual domain teams rather than a central data team. So what this allows is more agility, more scalability, more autonomy in terms of how you manage data. So it also helps emphasize using data platforms and services. So various platforms and services is designed so that you can support creating and consuming data. So what it is really about, the key message for that is really about decentralization of the data and treating data as a product.
Understood. Thanks, Clint. Tim, our next question is for you. Can you talk about use cases where NoSQL databases are better than relational databases?
Sure. Relational databases certainly have a history and some great strengths. But the main concept was designed from the point of efficiency, where you take an object in a application and you have to split it up into tables and break it down. So a JSON document database allows companies and developers to build out their data structures in their database akin to and aligned with their application, right? So that gives them a lot of flexibility to store data in a way where, let's say, for a person object or a product or anything related to personalization or customer 360, all of that information is in one document. They can change it very easily, but in terms of presenting that back to the user through the web interface or mobile interface or whatever you're doing, you have a lot of flexibility and also a lot of speed improvements in getting the information you need out to your application. So it's great for personalization, customer 360, dynamic product catalogs are kind of very common use cases.
Got it. Thanks, Tim. Michael, our next question is for you. Are there any changes to DevOps due to the cloud?
I think a lot of things are similar. So if DevOps means CI/CD to you, so you still have continuous integration, deployment, open source tools like Jenkins still there. There are many more new tools out there. So I will say the only thing cloud is changing is probably more options for you. So CI/CD is not new. But AWS, for example, has a code pipeline, which has all the code deploy, code build, so it kind of makes things easier, but of course you don't have to use code pipeline. You can still use Jenkins, so it does give you more options. Same for Azure, Azure have DevOps, the whole CI/CD cycle. So it does give you more tools. If DevOps means, a lot of times DevOps has a different meaning for application development teams versus infrastructure networking security folks. So infrastructure networking security folks, it's more about infrastructure as a code, if that's what DevOps means to you. Cloud definitely changed that. I think able to provision servers, databases, all the services, all the communication through code, like Terraform for both AWS and Azure, and then AWS has CloudFormation and Azure has ARM template. It drastically changed things. We can create multiple environments with the same script. We can use parameters and things like that, and I can look at the code and know exactly what is provisioned. So yeah, I think if from that perspective, yeah, cloud definitely changed DevOps.
Understood. Just out of curiosity, Michael, based on your observations, has cloud kind of become table stakes for DevOps in general?
Yeah, that's other factor is, first of all, I mean, we all know the importance of DevOps, but simply because cloud makes it so easy to adopt, it's becoming a important factor. It used to be you have to do a lot of groundwork, installation of tools, things like that. Now you don't have to install anything. It's all the services that cloud provider provides you, and you just have to configure and use.
Understood. Clint, I have a DevOps related question for you. You stated that data is the last frontier. Why is it so hard to automate for DevOps?
Yeah, so if you think about just the speed of just the software development lifecycle as it pertains to DevOps, there is a lot of automation. And when we think about, we've tried to automate everything that we can in terms of, with push and pull requests, with our software test automation, where we're actually pushing the testing as well as soon as we get the latest build and whatnot. So the challenge with data is it's really a hurry up and wait scenario. So for example, if I've pretty much automated everything, but I need that test data, typically I have to go through the bureaucracy of that organization. So I have to get approval to get data and basically get like a replica of that data from production. It has to be mass. And this sometimes it can take organization weeks just to get data. And then you're always playing catch up because you're further behind. So data is the piece that most organizations rarely think about until the last minute, which is why you're seeing the emergence of things such as data subsetting, which we've been doing that for years, but also synthetic data and how can we generate data that's realistic that we can use. Also trying to maintain referential integrity and keeping up with the pace and the speed of the software development in the paradigm of DevOps. So that's what makes it really the challenge, because most organizations were thinking about automation. We're thinking about every piece of that except for the data we need to ensure that we're properly testing this, which also dovetails into our security and compliance concerns.
Understood. Tim, question for you. How close is the Couchbase query language to ANSI SQL?
So our query language, we call it SQL++, and it's actually ANSI 92 compatible. And the difference is that we've actually just extended it because of our platform goes beyond just CRUD work, but also to support ACID transactions, our analytics service, and our full text search service as well. So it's kind of ANSI compliant and then extended to do other things on top of it. And it's one of the key reasons that our customers that one of the things they often list as their favorite thing about the platform is the fact that they can use SQL again for a NoSQL database.
Gotcha. So if you have those skills, not a problem.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay. Michael, next question for you. How do multi-cloud implementations impact the DBA role?
It's challenging to keep up, if you ask me. So let's say an organization adopt, I'm giving you an example, AWS, so you start looking at, okay, what AWS offer, you can always install on EC2, and then you start learning, RDS is there, and then what limitations it has. And then you go to Aurora, which is MySQL and PostgreSQL compatible, meant for more high performance databases. And then you start to compare contrast, you understand, it takes time, you understand what AWS offer. And then similarly, if an organization adopted Azure, you go through the same journey. When you start doing multi-cloud, it's harder. Now you're trying to keep up with two different clouds. So welcome to my world in that case. And then deployment, so if you do, it's kind of rare, but if you do have a global application with millions of users all over the world, and you're deploying in a multi-cloud, you have to figure out a deployment mechanism. And sometimes there are third-party tools out there to actually deploy your app and database changes as a part of release. So that's even more challenging. So I think it's a challenging from both trying to keep up. There are a lot of changes all the time with cloud provider. They're innovating very fast, providing services and features very fast. So for example, Azure has single server instance for a long time, and then the flexible server for managed instance came out, and it's a lot different than single server. And then you learn that, and then you do some POC and some projects and learn that, and then all of a sudden now they have PostgreSQL that you can run on Cosmos DB. So it's kind of hard to keep up from just a skills point of view. But it's also, as an organization, it's kind of also hard if you do have a multi-cloud deployment. It's kind of also, you have to figure out a deployment methodology which can work multi-cloud.
Do you see those skills in higher demand right now, Michael, folks that have proven themselves or have the background where they're capable of handling multi-cloud implementations for databases?
It is hard. And a lot of customers still have one cloud, but as you move to Fortune 500 companies, you will see, they have multiple cloud for different reasons. And it's very hard to find people with one cloud, let alone try to find multi-cloud skills. So it's definitely harder. Some DBAs I do know has taken the the database specialist certification and some projects on AWS side, and they're doing the same for Azure. So they're taking the long journey. It is harder, no doubt, but sometimes in an organization where you do use multiple cloud, it becomes important that we are confident in both clouds.
Understood. No, appreciate it. Okay, so I have a question I'd love all of you to weigh in on. Obviously, with data management, database management in the cloud, it comes with changes, challenges, as well as opportunities. What do you see based on your observations is the hottest area right now with respect to database management that is somewhat new? Is it evolving more towards the direction of security, DevOps, data engineering, and analytics, from the standpoint of traditional roles and how those are evolving and what folks can focus on now? And Clint, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. I would say to me the number one area in which this is really affecting the cloud and database management is really about security. So security is number one, because as we start to increase the amount of data that we're using and that we're required to store and we're required to test with, it becomes a huge issue. So many organizations really need to make sure that we don't take it for granted, right? We've seen data breaches happen because they've got in through test environments using test data, or if you have test data or data that hasn't been masked properly, can really cause a lot of compliance issues. So it's only going to get a little bit more tricky and a little bit more diverse with cybersecurity. And I would say the second thing that's really going to change it is as we start to see the influence and increased usage of generative AI. So we're starting to see AI and machine learning really take place across the board, and data management is not going to be in trouble.
Understood. No, and I'm glad you brought that up. Tim, would love your thoughts on this.
Sure. Security, yes, I agree. Security is always going to be a critical aspect of any database and data platform. I think though that in terms of two areas that I think we're hearing a lot more from our customers about are, and it doesn't really fall into the buckets that you described, but honestly, as you think about the cloud, is total cost of ownership, right? We're getting people we're talking to them and they're getting their bills back from their cloud service providers, and they're much larger than they thought. And they're trying to figure out, what can I do in terms of my databases and data platforms to reduce my cloud spend, right? Especially in today's economy. So that's kind of one area that we're hearing a lot from customers. And the other one is kind of more on the advanced technologies, I think, is the move to serverless computing, right? To more quickly be able to scale up and scale down applications, to experiment, do dev test, try out new projects, right? Serverless gives companies a lot of opportunity there. And so I think that's another area that we're hearing more about. And I think that does tie into the ML AI type scenario, right? Plugging those models into a serverless backend, right? So those are kind of the two areas that we're hearing a lot about from our customers.
Those are great points, Tim. Cloud sticker shock definitely happens. And I know it's been said that over the pandemic, a lot of companies started throwing a lot of things into the cloud and, are starting to sort out what they think would be most cost effective moving forward. And I think you're right with serverless as well. And that ties into, what we see going on in DevOps too, with microservices and cloud native applications. Michael, would love your point of view on this as well.
Yeah, sure. So I will try to share what I'm seeing last 6 months. So cost optimization, like you said, is coming up a lot. And I think within the organizations, people like their teams. They want to keep the team members. They want to cut the cost somewhere else. And sometimes it's the cloud bill, which is they want to cut, and I engage a lot of those discussions and projects. So data lake a lot cheaper. So if you're doing it on AWS like S3 based data lake, or Azure Blob Storage based data lake, a lot cheaper. Those are storage, the cold, the warm storage, very cheap compared to any like you attaching to a server. So those are cost opportunities, cost optimization opportunities. Also, a lot of times lift and shift. Over provisioning happened. Both AWS, Azure has on demand versus reserved. Reserved give you some discount where you do commit to longer time period for your machines. Serverless, of course, serverless has a properties where it can auto scale up and down, but also in some cases like Aurora Serverless, it shuts down when you're not using it. So not every use case has a place where you have a database offline for 1 hour a day or 2 hour a day, but the options are there. Also, I think on the DBA side, we're looking at how we optimize compute and storage, because those could be over the time can be costly. So you're trying to look at each database transaction, starting and finishing earlier. So you're optimizing indexes, queries, all that. And also, do you need all that data? Do you need a big storage? Can you archive it in a, let's say, offline storage, things like that? So those activities are happening, and I'm working a lot of those projects last 6 months.
Fantastic. Thank you, Michael. I know we're past the top of the hour. The audience is staying with us, which is always a good sign, and we certainly appreciate that. Real quick, each of you, if there's one thing you'd like our attendees to walk away today keeping in mind, what would it be? Clint, you first.
Sure. I think for me, the one thing that I would want the attendees to walk away from is, or to gather from this talk, is to really understand not only the complexity of data management for test data management, but also understanding the security concerns as well, and hopefully the ability to use ephemeral environments so that you can, as my colleagues talked about, reducing that total cost of ownership. So I think that is key in terms of where it kind of dovetails into security, as well as reducing that cost by using data virtualization and with ephemeral environments to spin up and spin down those items. So that would be the main thing I would say would be the biggest takeaway for the audience.
All right, Tim, how about you?
I think it would just be as you look to cloud and database management, right? There's a lot of options in whether you're going to be doing self-management, you're going to be semi-automated, you're going to be, as a service offering, and eventually even serverless, right? So if you can, having a platform that gives you consistency across those different phases is a good thing, because, obviously different applications will have different needs and have different timelines. And so you definitely want to balance that out in the right way.
Absolutely. And Michael, last but not least, your thoughts.
I think cloud changed the IT landscape. Some folks kind of jumped right in terms of moving their organization to cloud and also upskilling. In some cases, there was hesitation, in some cases, myth about security, that cloud is not secure or cloud costs more. And I've been doing cloud for roughly 10 years now. And from my experience, yes, it could be costly. Security is as good as what you configure, whether it's on-prem or cloud. And then a lot of tooling out there, to make it easy to secure. But in terms of cost, of course, you have to kind of watch out, make sure things are done right, following the best practices, and then you will see those cost savings also. So whether you're moving your own skills to cloud, whether you want to move your organization to the cloud, I think it's a good thing to go to the cloud, adopt, and take the benefits that it offers for the organizations.
Okay, well, I would like to give a huge thank you to our speakers today for coming on board and sharing their insights and expertise. Once again, Clint Sprav, Director of Product Marketing at Delphix, Tim Rotak, Director of Product Marketing at Couchbase, and Michael Agarwal, Global Practice Leader, Cloud Databases, SRE, and NoSQL at DataVeil. So if you and our audience would like to review this presentation or send it to a colleague, you can use the same exact URL that you used for today's live event. It will be archived, and we will send you an email notification once that archive is available to watch on demand. Also, just for participating in today's event, you could win this $100 Amazon gift card. The winner will be announced on April 28th. We'll let you know by email if you are the lucky viewer. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon.